Hello, Internet. Welcome to another episode of the Experimental Cataclysm. If you don't know, this is the show where we talk about updates that have come to the experimental version of Cataclysm over the last couple of weeks. We actually did not have very much content in the change logs this week. It was mostly bug fixes and things like that. And there was really nothing huge, no major mechanics changes or anything like that. There's no real bugs going on that are game breaking. So yeah, in fact, the only thing I can think of is that tile sets have been having an issue, specifically undead people, because the other tile sets were updated alongside some changes. But you may have had some issues with tile sets. There over the last couple of weeks, there were some issues with mods that were not being maintained. Basically, all you need to do is look for the most current version of those things. If a mod is being maintained, it should already have been fixed. Tile sets, if they're all the tile sets that are currently being maintained, I believe are now up to date. So if you were getting issues with the tile set errors surrounding the undead people tile set, I believe that has been fixed. Mods, of course, are up to the mod maintainers. So that's really the only news in that regard. Everything else is pretty light. And of course, it's Christmas today, so I guess we should say something about that. There should be a video on the channel like Merry Christmas or something like that if you're interested in hearing my holiday message, but we're going to ignore that for now. So let's just jump into it. First, from 8th Street, we had the addition of pigeons to the game. I only mention this because they're pigeons. I mean, pigeons are apparently some sort of evolutionary marvel that Darwin would be very proud of, but everybody I know hates pigeons, but now we have pigeons in the game. Really nothing to say here. They're just some more birds. Additionally, there were some updates which are not listed here. I didn't link them anywhere, but there were some updates to birds to make them a little bit more realistic behavior. I think, it's always been really historically difficult to get near birds, and I'm thinking that pigeons are probably what facilitated that change. That may or may not be correct, but like, for instance, pigeons are very comfortable around human beings, so they wouldn't really necessarily scatter at the approach of a survivor, whereas in the game previously, birds would essentially scatter and never get within range of the player just because of the nature of the birds in the game. Some of that has been changed. I haven't really played with it to know, but birds have been tweaked a little bit to be a little bit more realistic, and we had the addition of pigeons. And I'm sorry too if these are in no way connected. I don't know. I didn't take note of who actually made those changes, so don't take that personally. Moving on. Next, from ZAnimal, we have the nerf to the fastest, the new zombie animals. So essentially the way attacking works in Cataclysm, for the most part, monster attacks are directly tied to their movement speed. So something that is fast will get more attacks per turn. So for instance, the Migo is a very, very fast creature. They get more attacks per turn than, say, a standard zombie, which moves roughly the same speed as the player. There are ways around this. However, you can specify attack costs in the monster entry so that their speed and attack costs are separate. That way, you can make a fast creature that still only attacks once per turn. And essentially what this person has done is gone through to some of the zombie animals, specifically zombie horse, woodland white, and the antlered hammer, which I've never heard of. I didn't really look very closely at the names of the creatures, but yeah, so basically these things were very fast, and that meant they were getting more attacks than what this person or the team or whatever thought was appropriate. So what they've done is change the attack speed to be equal to their actual speed. What that means is that they're only going to be making one attack per turn now instead of making however many they were before, based entirely on their speed. Hopefully that all makes sense. If you're a fan of roguelikes, and you probably are, you probably know that speed is one of the most crucial parts of a roguelike. Doesn't really matter what you're playing, NetHack, Angband, doesn't matter. Speed in a turn-based game like this is super, super important, and being able to make multiple attacks per turn is very, very significant edge in combat. So it makes a lot of sense that these would be reviewed and nerfed slightly. Like I said, I haven't really been playing, so I have not experienced these things in their unnerfed form, but it makes a lot of sense to me that you would want around one attack per turn, particularly if they're dangerous creatures. Like horses in life are very, very dangerous creatures, actually. And so I would imagine a zombie horse would actually be pretty deadly. And I could see that, they would probably have high damage dice and things like that. And then you add on top of that a really significant speed, and all of a sudden you have yourself a devastating killing machine. So, makes a lot of sense to me. Some of the animals have been nerfed. Seems like a good change to me. Wanted to mention it. Moving on. Next, from Railrunner, we have the addition of more primitive clothing. I don't know how often you do in the woods type gameplay. I really don't do it. I've done it once or twice, but I do remember that we did not really have any primitive clothing. The only ones I can think of even is like the loincloth is the one that comes to mind. So what this person has done is added multiple new clothing, primarily focused around weaving. So we have a straw cape, a wicker backpack, grass skirt, things like that. And they've added these primitive clothing to the game. So this should enable you who are playing in a woods kind of gameplay style. You should have more access to actual clothing instead of having to rely on, well, frankly, nudity was the main thing, or finding rags and things to make your clothing, which was pretty difficult in an in the woods playthrough. So not super significant. Obviously not something that will come up in every playthrough, but it's good that I like this. I like that this was added to the game. We really should have more stuff, especially now that we have proficiencies. I can't imagine in fact, added a new weaving proficiency. So I can't imagine that this is something that's super practical or would come up very often. So it makes a lot of sense to me that adding clothing and simple things like that to work into this proficiency is really good. So I think that's really great. I like having that. And of course, this opens up as well for additional weaving things, like being able to make baskets and containers and things while playing a game where you don't have access to most of the tools that we would get from looting houses. So I like the primitive stuff. I think it makes sense. And yeah, we had a real lack of it. There was the more survival tools mod, which I believe this has been updated. So it's just interesting. You know, I know some of you like the in the woods style, survivalist style. It's not for me personally, but I think that this is a cool addition to that. Makes finding gear, crafting your gear a little bit easier. Next, from Zeranogin, which is not their first PR. I thought this was their first PR. I must be mixing them up with someone else. We got adds looks like to a number of books. So if you don't know what looks like is, basically, I think Mark made it a couple of years ago. So this was back when I was still playing on the chest hole tile set. There were a lot of broken tiles, and there was really no functionality to connect tiles to other items. So what looks like does is it basically says, hey, if this item doesn't have a tile, it looks like this other thing, so you can use that tile. So for instance, in this particular PR, there were a lot of broken books in Altica. We can see an example of that here. If these books had a looks like line, let's say this is just for example, let's say this is the regular forging or first aid pamphlet. Let's say this is the first aid pamphlet, and we have another first aid book that doesn't have a tile. We can specify this looks like the first aid pamphlet. That way, if the first aid book doesn't have its own tile, it will instead use the tile of the first aid pamphlet. And this can be nested as far as I know. So for instance, not nested, but like a chain of things. So if the first aid pamphlet also did not have a tile, but it looked like a different first aid book, it would chain down the line and they would all look like each other. So what this person has done is just a little bit of auditing, and Altica has a lot of these broken tiles for when there are items on the ground. It's one of the areas that Altica is really lacking. And they went through and they basically just added looks like to all these books. So now what you'll see is like repetitive sprites, but it's no longer these broken ASCII tiles. So it's just a bit of auditing, a lot of tedious work, making sure everything looks like something else. This is really something that contributors should be doing from the door anyway. Anytime you add anything to the game, it's really, I don't see a reason not to use looks like. It's a really valuable tool. When it was implemented, I was really excited about this. And it just makes it so much better for tile set makers so that even when they don't have a tile, we create a new monster. Well, we already have a base looks like, so it can look like something else. So pretty cool, and certainly helps out with Altica where they do have a lot of those broken item sprites. So that's cool. And on a tile set note, we should have mentioned this at the top, many of them have been updated, mostly because I think of those issues I mentioned at the top of the show. So I saw that I think it was Frizz went through, updated Altica, MSX, whichever plus, I don't know what that tile set is, and Chibi Altica as well has been updated. So I think that that's why that happened. But yeah, so the tile sets have been getting updated as well. Let's move on to the next thing. Next from Venera. I hope I'm saying that right because it's okay. Next from V, we have a redesign of arthropods, and this is part 2 for centipedes. I don't really want to go over this too much because it is quite a bit of spoiler information, I guess, on the monsters. And also because it's a very expansive PR that's quite lengthy. In fact, I'm going to scroll down if you don't want spoilers for the monsters or whatever. I get it, just skip ahead to the next timestamp. But anyway, this is quite a lengthy, verbose PR. The main thing that I took away from this is that centipedes basically got, the way it sounded to me, they got buffed pretty well and have all these variants to them, which is concerning. I think they got nerfed throughout the course of this PR. Like they had been discussing it and they changed some things. You'll see it's quite a lot. Things have been changed over and over. There have been comments and things and updates to this. So it's quite an expansive PR. You can look in the description down below for a link to this page if you're interested in following the conversation and whatnot. Oh, that's right. Yes. So they toned down their reproduction. So these things, when they implemented them, they specifically referenced that they wanted to make it a dangerous creature that the player would feel pressured to address. Because if the player left a group of centipedes alone, they would eventually grow to overwhelm the player. I'm very cautious about things like this because I have seen that ants in the game, which are probably the best example of a creature in the game running out of control. Ants, fungal creatures, these things, in my opinion, tend to ruin the game. They tend to be a little bit too much. Ants in the game can often be a point where the player just says, you know what, I'm just going to move because I don't want to deal with hundreds and hundreds of ants. Oh, there's fungals over there. You know what? I'm leaving. I'm not even going to deal with that. I'm just going to leave. So my concern is that that's what's going to happen with the centipedes. And they specifically in here somewhere reference that they don't want that to happen. But that is my concern whenever we have something like this that reproduces and is threatening. And especially because these upgrade over time, whereas the ants actually don't really do that. So I'm concerned that this might be... What do I want to say here? I'm concerned this might grow out of control and become a huge issue. But I personally have a really soft spot for centipedes. Growing up, I played a lot of Angband, which had centipedes as a low-level creature that were very fascinating to me when I was like 8 years old. So I've always had a soft spot for centipedes, so I'm happy to see them added to the game. I just have some reservations over how big of an issue this is going to be. So I would encourage you, if you see centipedes, I've already seen some in my game. I think they were hanging out at swamps the time that I saw them. I haven't seen the upgraded forms or anything like that. I would encourage you to check them out, see what you think, gauge their deadliness, how dangerous you think they are and what you think the best course of action is. But I'm cautious because I have seen ants be out of control for a long time. And I remember, even to this day, I play with the antifungal mod or the no fungal mod because I just can't deal with the fungaloids, even though they've been... Is fungaloids a word? Even though they've been nerfed over the last, like a year ago, I think they got nerfed pretty significantly in their reproduction. I still don't want to play with a creature that dominates the world as much as fungaloids do. So I have concerns, but I think this is interesting, and I do like the evolutions that are coming for animals and things like that. But yeah, I have reservations, and I'm a little concerned about it. But we'll see how it goes. I would encourage you to check them out. Check out the PR if you're interested. And yeah, that's probably all I have to say about that. Next, from Sathion, we have an increased yield for butchering quartered corpses. So previously, I guess there was an issue where it was actually using quarters twice. It was reducing the amount of meat that you were able to retrieve more than it was supposed to, is what I understand. I honestly didn't give this much of a look because someone had already kind of explained it to me on Discord. The takeaway, and really all that matters, is that now when you quarter corpses, you're actually losing 5% of the meat from the quartering process. That's really all I feel that needs to be taken away from this. I don't know what was happening exactly before, but essentially, if you quarter a creature, you will lose 5% of the meat. This is, as far as I know, better than it used to be, and that's really all that there is to say about that. I just wanted to mention this because it's something that was brought up on Discord that I did not know, so I think that that's interesting. I very rarely quarter corpses in the game. I almost always quick butcher, which people always have a problem with. They always tell me you should be doing full butcher, but I never care enough to do so. And then for quartering, I understand the value of transport, but I just never do it. But yeah, 5% is a very insignificant amount of meat to lose, so that's something worth mentioning. And then finally, from Avian, we have the ability to tie. So essentially, what this PR does, you're able to wear a rope on your body, and when you do so, it gives you a pocket that can accommodate most things. And this is to simulate you tying a rope around the item for the purposes of easy transport. So I think they gave some examples down here. Confused me initially is that I always thought the ropes were thicker. I thought they were big hemp ropes. And according to this PR, they're approximately 2 millimeters, which is not at all what I was picturing. And certainly that makes it easier to transport smaller items than trying to use a big hemp rope. So for instance, they give the example of a lighter here, which I thought was silly when I was thinking, oh, you're not going to tie a lighter to a hemp rope. But in the context of something like this, that makes a lot of sense for smaller items. So essentially, you get this pocket, where's the short rope? So short rope or long rope both work for this. The short rope is, I think, 6 feet long. Probably says somewhere 6 foot long piece of rope. It doesn't specify long rope. I don't remember. I think that one was quite long, actually. But anyway, when you wear this, it actually gives you this pocket that can store basically anything that's not a liquid. And it's very slow to use because it's a rope. You're tying things to the rope. It's not something you're just, throwing something in your cargo pants. It's actually a rope you have to actively tie around the object. Based on the container of based on what it contains, the encumbrance of this item will go up. So I believe ropes are always worn on the torso. Is that correct? I actually don't know, but regardless, if whatever body part it is, it can be not I think the encumbrance is not as significant as I would have guessed, and it just allows you to accommodate things that you would not otherwise be able to store in your inventory. So when you find a rifle and you don't have a bag that can accommodate it and you're already carrying a shotgun in your hands, you have the option now of wearing your rope, tying the rifle into the rope, and yes, it gives you encumbrance, but it allows you to transport that additional large item. So that's essentially what this is. Some things are still too long, so there is a limitation on it. We can see the pocket details here. The max item length is 110 centimeters. I'm an imperialist. I have no idea what that translates to in inches. But we can see, these pockets are quite large and can accommodate quite, things that you would otherwise have to carry in your hands. So I saw this and actually thought like, tying items to worn ropes, that doesn't mean anything to me. But this is actually a really useful, I think, thing for a lot of people. You can just throw on a rope and allow yourself to carry one additional large item around instead of having to wield it in your hands. I personally would choose to haul most items instead of actually strapping an AR-15 to drag behind me, on my waist or whatever. But it's something, and I thought a lot of people would be interested in this, so I wanted to mention it. Now, again, it is very slow. So picking items up in Cataclysm, as far as I know, is always 1 second. I think that's it says it's a bug. I guess I don't know. I take their word for it. It must be a bug because I believe every time you pick up an item, it always takes 1 turn. I'm not 100% on that, but that's what I think. And then retrieving items and whatnot, all of that stuff takes the move cost of the specific item. So we can see that here. It's 3,000 for the large rope, 2,000 for the short rope, which is very, very slow. That's 30 30 turns is quite a significant time to spend doing something like that. And again, it can't accommodate liquids. I can't really think of what else to say about it. It's honestly, it's not, it's a little bit silly. It's not exactly implemented in a way that, because it uses the pocket system, you know, it's not perfect, but it's allowing for something that you couldn't do previously, and it makes sense. It is something you can do in real life, you know, to carry things that would otherwise be difficult to carry. So I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know that I'll personally be taking very much use of it. Yeah, somebody used the example of tying a bundle of ropes in this way and how it's not really practical, but you know, there's really, you know, it allows you to do things like that. So I don't know. It's interesting. I don't think I will use it, but I figured people would be interested in this. I don't really carry ropes with me either. So even if I did want to take advantage of this, a rope is such an odd thing to carry around on my person. But yeah, thought people would want to know. So I think that's it. Honestly, I don't have much more to say about that. Just wanted to bring it to people's attention. So everybody, that's probably a wrap for this week. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you're having a nice holiday. If not, remember, things are just temporary. We're almost through. It'll be 2021 before you know it. And I, of course, will be back in the new year with another episode of the Experimental Cataclysm. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.